Chapter 95, The Broken Curse. As Michael closed his eyes, he tried to clear his mind of everything that had just happened. He was done. He had done it. There was nothing else left for him to do. But then again, Mr. Dorian was still sitting there. Michael felt like taking another glance at him to see what else could come of him. As he lifted up his head to look at him, he saw Mr. Dorian going for his gun. What is he going to do now? Thought Michael. He had no clue what else to expect from the man with the broken fedora, who was now sitting there eyeing his piece. He seemed to be trenched in a memory of something he had long ago witnessed, and was reacting that scene in his head. I've disgraced you. Done nothing but disgrace you, and everything you stood for, said he. Then took one last gaze and placed the gun in his mouth. At this point, Michael felt like saying nothing, letting the old devil have his last minute. Fuck him. But then the scene began to trench Michael into his own memory of something he had witnessed long ago as well, and now he felt like he just couldn't. Don't do it, cringed out Michael. Mr. Dorian took the gun out for a second and looked confused, wondering why this Michael would even care after everything he had put him through, and then placed the gun back in his mouth. Don't do it. Why do you care? Said Mr. Dorian demurely. Michael then turned around and said, because it reminds me of my father, that's why. Mr. Dorian narrowed his eyes for a second at what Michael had just said, then shook his head, a little unsure of what he just heard, how it correlated to him. Your father. What about your father? Michael closed his eyes and then started. My father's name was Madboy, or Robert Connelly, and he actually started the Bloody Shamrocks back in... Mr. Dorian now made an impatient look. Well, that's not what's important to you. Michael paused and then tried again. What would be important was he was also in that war you were in. Was a fucking Marine, was at Iwo Jima, and also had medals for everything he had done, same as you. All right, said Mr. Dorian impatiently still. He was a proud man, but also had demons from the war. Saw things that changed him. I really wouldn't know that much since I wasn't there to see who he was before, but I've heard he was different by people who knew him, so I believe it. Well, he used to drink a lot, and I mean a lot. Drank so much he started turning red, and that's why they called him Madboy. Michael, I really don't know where you're going with this, but just listen, alright? Will you? Asked Michael as he saw how he needed to step it up. Mr. Dorian was now staring at his piece again. He was never the same when he came out, and one day back in the 70s before I went to prison, I caught him in his room, dressed up in his old Marine dress blue uniform, with medals dangling and all, also with a gun in his mouth, looking ready to blow his brains out. And that now, hearing that, got Mrs. Dorian's full undivided attention. Are you fucking kidding me? Gasped Mr. Dorian as he couldn't believe the coincidence of the story he was hearing. Why? Asked Michael as he noticed the story was having an effect on Mr. Dorian, as his mouth started to periodically open and close violently again. Just go on, said Mr. Dorian as he really began to take heed. Also continued eyeing his piece in his hand. I begged him to stop, fucking begged him, but he seemed like he had set himself straight and there was nothing going to change his mind. Fucking asshole, fucking hard ass. He was such a stoic type, so rough around the edges, always keeping to himself except when he... And now I had to face him like this. He looked like he'd spend a good portion of his life scared out of his mind. Since seeing the shit he had seen, so as he said goodbye, I just couldn't take it anymore and I started tearing up. Michael paused and noticed how dumbfounded Mr. Dorian seemed. But then when he saw me tearing up, he began tearing up too, and I've never seen him do that, never. One second I thought he was really going to do it, but then he didn't. Michael began panting hard as he remembered this story, And as he looked over at Mr. Dorian, he seemed like he could no longer control that impulse of his, as his mouth went full blast, violently opening and closing, almost looking like he was going to dislocate his jaw. "What's happening to you?" asked Michael. But then Mr. Dorian grabbed his face again with his left hand and forced it to stop. Michael eyed him a bit more in confusion, but then felt like continuing. "I asked him then, was it really that bad? Was he really just that afraid? It scared the shit out of me to think anyone could live that long, being scared out of their mind from the shit they had seen." And now Michael saw how Mr. Dorian was slowly tearing up too, except in his own way. No tears, since it seemed the devil no longer had any. But yet his eyes were telling the tale. Anyways, he said no. He told me he was just tired of living. He'd had his time, and his time had come and went. I left him in the dust. He had nothing else left, and he was just tired. Wanted to end it so he could simply shut off, go to sleep, and be at peace. After Michael said that, he noticed Mr. Dorian was no longer trying to tear up, had stopped convulsating, and had then grown a quaint smirk on his face, as if what Michael had said there meant a lot to him. "That's why he said that. I just don't want to see it." "Anything else?" asked Mr. Dorian. "Well, he eventually died of a heart attack, but only recently, a couple of years ago while I was in prison. But I guess he's finally at peace now. Even after that night, he was never happy. Still wanted to just close his eyes and go to sleep permanently, and not have to think another damn thing again. Fuck. I haven't gotten a single wink of sleep in 3 weeks straight. Can you believe that shit?" "Yes," answered Mr. Dorian quickly. "Well, I don't know. I guess right now, sleep would seem like a good idea too," said Michael, with a sigh at the end. Mr. Dorian picked up his face, glared at Michael solemnly, and said, "I haven't slept in 3 months. And, wow. Simply, wow, are you kidding me? 3 months?" thought Michael as he cringed at the possibilities. "Sleep," said Mr. Dorian. "Yeah," said Michael. "To simply shut off and be at peace, huh?" "Yeah," followed up Michael again. "And now, I think I like that idea too," said Mr. Dorian now demurely enough. Then smiled a brilliant smile with a twinkle in his eye, placed the gun back in his mouth, and no! Pulled the trigger and blew his brains out. "Well, at least I tried." Michael then stared into the face of this scared old man that he thought was a monster, and decided not to think about it for another second. Rompus pompous, I ain't thinking about shit anymore, ever again. Michael felt like whatever insanity that man had made himself live through for God knows how long was at least finally over with. And that was all that mattered in the end. Michael then rolled onto his back and sort of wished he could just fall asleep again. Fall asleep himself. And after what felt like an hour had passed, Michael opened his eyes then and realized he still couldn't. Something was still off. As he opened his eyes and felt the daylight shining in through the lobby window that was just being born over the horizon. I still can't sleep. What the hell is going on? Michael then took one last look over at his mitts and began to wonder what to do with them next. If there was ever a part of him that had given him a sense of his own true worth, it'd be they. They had once been his livelihood and his pride. But the only thing now is, thought Michael while laying there before the sun, can they give me the strength now to make it through the light? Wait, what does that even mean? Now. And for some reason, Michael began thinking about the story he had told about his father. In doing such, Michael went deeper into memory of him, as things started falling into places, puzzle pieces, long been missing, which had been found now, and these pieces were falling into place. With a jigsaw puzzle Michael realized he'd been working on for a very, very long time now. What the... Now Michael was being awakened in other ways he had long thought he never would. And it has all to do with my old man. Just as Michael had spent all his time since going to prison, all pointlessly, directionlessly, and meaninglessly living on by, waiting, just waiting for something to give, at least end. So had the old man done the same, but unlike Michael, he never cared for any resolution to it all, something to give. I feel like he'd lived a life that had been fulfilled, for something at least. No, Robert Connelly was different. He was a much more grayer man. Life for him had become a different sort of merry-go-round, spinning and spinning and spinning, and him being content that it never went anywhere. Robert Connelly was a bored man, a very bored man, and lost, and something else. He wasn't an afraid man. He really was one-dimensionally evil. Now, another memory began to play in Michael's head of him and his father, a much more important one, a much more crucial one. The 60s. This was back in their old home in Coney Island. Robert Madboy Connelly was a lonely old man who had burnt down almost all his bridges to the rest of the world, and found himself on an island to himself, a violent and aggressive man with his own bloody tale to tell. Robert had come home from a long day of work and had found his son sniffling over something. This didn't sit well with the old tyrant, as he began instantly smacking Michael around some and really started pounding in his fists. When the boy wouldn't let up and started crying louder, by the end Robert had his son bleeding on the floor with a broken nose, 2 broken ribs, and his face all bruised up, looking as blue as the New England coast on a cloudy day winter morning. Once he had gotten his son to stop crying, that's when he had stopped, for chances were, if that little pipsqueak was to continue crying anymore, Robert might have gone truly overboard and flat out murdered him. Once his son stopped crying, Robert looked down at him and shook his head, and then decided the only way he was going to get through with him now is by telling him a story. A story about how he used to be. "You know, I'll teach you something about being a man," said Robert Connelly as he began his tale. Michael looked away then and tried to hold his nose as it continued to gush with blood. "Maybe it'll get through your head, and maybe it won't, but I'm gonna tell it to you anyways, because you need to learn this," said Robbie Connelly, flat toned with zero expression. Michael had then grown frightened as his father began staring at him so, with eyes enraptured with horrors only he could see, eyes as covered over with shrouds, covering and hiding details into his inner being. "This is an old story of something that happened between me and an old friend of mine, sometime before you were born, back in the early 50s in LA. Now, not all the details are true, but I'm gonna tell it to you in a way so you get me now and understand why I keep giving you lickings like these. Anyways, this old friend of mine used to be a man that had never taken a licking in his life, was never in WW2 or the Korean War, a true pansy. Me and the rest of the bloody Shamrocks always had to deal with. Real beatnik, who I personally initiated and made him a part of us. Was such a fucking pansy at one point. We called him Frenchy Boy for it. Anyways, you see, when you're dealing with the sort that has never taken a good licking before, when you first meet them, the sort will smile at you, all queer-like, with open eyes, like they wanted to be bestest of friends. But little does they know the type of man they're dealing with. Little did he know, Frenchy Boy did. The type of man out there that maybe ain't too good to be friends with. Robert Connelly then paused and grew a faintly amused smirk on his face. "He wants to be my friend, okay? He wants to be my friend, okay? So being such a swell friend that I was, you know what I did? I punched and broke his stupid fucking nose and shattered it like glass. And then as his eyes blew up, he became stupid with disbelief and whined like a little girl in pain, crying, 'Why did you do that? What have I done to deserve this? Why are you being mean to me?' And his heart sort of cracked up a bit at the thought that there could be men out there like me, that might have zero compassion for him, or even zero compassion for anyone or anything for that matter. And these men could possibly be so cruel and evil that they would find a dark sense of humor doing what I did, recounted Robert Connelly as his smirk grew wider. A week later, he sees me smiling at him on the street. He petrifies in place, shivering in fear as I approach him. Petrified in place and was unable to break away. So when I reached him, I smiled to say hello to my new bestest of buddy. And I broke his stupid fucking nose again. And his nose this time almost collapsed on itself. His eyes busted out and he screeched like a freaking old woman. "No, please don't do it. Don't hurt me anymore. No, no," as I began laughing and walking away. Robert Connelly then busted out with a small chuckle, but then shook it off, staring into Michael's eyes and saw how scared shitless he was making him, which made Robert shrug a bit in discontent. Another week passed before I saw him again. And when I saw him again this time, he tried to make a run for it. But you know what? If he wants to be my friend, I'm going to honor him as a friend and teach him what it means to be friends with a swell guy like me. There's no chickening out now. So as I chased him down to greet my new bestest chum, I caught up to him, sacked him to the ground, and as he screamed out, "No, don't hit me anymore," I broke his stupid fucking nose again, spat in his face, and laughed, and laughed. Robert Donnelly seemed to want to burst out with a chuckle again, but frowned instead. Seeing something like that, seeing how there can be men as evil as me, seeing as how deeply I might be loving destroying him, so he became horrified beyond measures. Now truly unable to let go how there are men like me out there, his mind shattered, just as his flimsy, stupid nose would, and had been doing every time I saw him. Robert Connelly then looked down at his right mitt and felt bored with it. Another week passed. I wasn't seeing him on the street as I used to, so this time I broke into his house to see him laying in bed. Frenchy boy there looked like a Looney Tune now, completely put out to green pastures. His eyes were spinning in his head as he wiggled his lips with his finger like they do in those cartoons you be watching, afraid out of his mind. At how cruel and uncaring the world that he lives in can be. So then, as I went over to greet my new bestest of chums again, I walked over, stood over his bed, and smiled so tenderly like at him, so lovingly. And as he screamed in horror, saying the Reaper, I broke his stupid fucking nose once more and laughed in Irish glee. Robert Connelly was now unable to hold back his true nature as he busted out into laughter, his eyes widening in rapture by the rush, which was the first time Michael had ever seen his father open up like this to him. Most of the time he was a hollow, dreary man that spent his time at bars flatlining a storm, quiet, expressionless, and shrill. But now Michael was seeing him opening up to show the type of demons he was carrying. Demons that made him fancy being so cruel and twisted and out of boredom. Robert Connelly then looked into Michael's eyes again and grew a bit sad at how he was scaring him shitless. He then looked back to his right mitt and began to grow disgusted with it. But this time, besides his nose and mind shattering, something else truly shattered. His heart shattered, and now completely. And when that happened, he wasn't scared no more. Because I had been teaching him time and time again that there were men like me that did exist, and now he wasn't scared no more. He had taken a couple of lickings and had seen they weren't going to be the end of his world. And this time, when he looked up at me laying there in his bed, he cringed up with teeth, with blood in his eyes, and tried to lash out like a wild animal. And when he tried to attack me, I then went all out on him, beating him into a bloody, pulpy mess, left for the medics. Robert Connelly then looked to one side and seemed to be trenched in thought. A month had then passed. His Frenchy boy there had returned from the hospital. And on that day, when he saw his new bestest of friends, me, walking over to him, you know what? He wasn't scared of me no more. He wasn't screaming like some crazy old dame in horror. You know what he was doing? He was smiling, just as I was smiling back at him. So when I walked up to him to greet him by saying hello, by breaking his stupid fucking nose again, after I did, Frenchy boy there paused for a bit, wiped the blood off his face, licked it a little, smiled again, and said, "What else you got?" Robert Connelly then grew a faint, compassionate smile as he stared off for a bit more, but then shrugged it off and began to wonder, I know, maybe it's a cruel and lousy way to start a friendship. Maybe I ain't such a swell friend to him. Maybe I'm being downright lousy. Maybe it doesn't need to be that way, so I don't know. But what I do know is that man will never again be afraid out of his mind of men like me again, 'cause he now knows he can handle them. So I ask you, do you think I did him a service, or you think I did not? Robert Connelly then eyed Michael from the side and waited to see what his boy would say, what his response would be. So? But Michael had none. Well, anyways, if I ever catch you tearing up again, I'll break your stupid fucking nose again. I'll keep doing it until it sticks. Show me weakness again, son, and I'll learn you to regret it. Oh, trust me on that. You will learn the hard way to regret it. That I promise. You catch my drift? Michael then nodded, as his father went over to the kitchen fridge, took out some tequila, and began chugging it straight from the bottle. He then sat down and stared off into nothing, all very lonely-like, while his face began to turn red. You know what? I take it back what I told Gabe once. He was a cruel and twisted man. And I'm glad I'm nothing like him. At least not like that. As for his question, do I think it's a lousy way to start a friendship? I'll tell him now, yes, I really think so. Fucking hard ass. If you ask me, he was even more evil than Dorian here. Dorian was just a scared old man that had lost his mind. My dad was always in control of his true nature, which was straight up evil. Shit. But I guess he at least had pity and compassion, even though he tried to hide it. Maybe if he wasn't such a stoic hard ass, he wouldn't have been such a lonely old man that eventually decided to do himself in. That scared away my mother. And then Michael felt it. A change of heart that had been long overdue, as he started blaming the parent of his that really deserved most of his animosity. And also, now that I remember, I think I was sniffling at the time, wondering about what happened to my mom. Yeah. And now he felt it. Fuck him. What a piece of shit he was. What type of low-life nut beats the fuck out of a kid for missing his mom? Who? Huh? Who? Fuck you. And I can see now how every time I've ever beaten the crap out of someone, I've always imagined, on some level, it was him on the receiving end. Toughening up someone so he could stand up for himself is one thing, but to do it the way he did so he could make everyone as cold and ruthless and twisted and seriously unfit for this world as he was. And to think I spent my entire life idolizing that fucking nutcase. Michael now felt the fire scorch him completely, and then realized the merry-go-round that had been spinning in his head since that moment had now finally stopped, within him as well. The insanity that had been rampaging within him was now over, and he was back to his real old self, or really whatever that remained. A dreary little pipsqueak with a broken nose, sniffling and wondering where his mom had went. He's the reason my mom left and ended up in a gutter. And all he could do then was beat the fuck out of me and try to turn me into a heartless, evil piece of shit asshole like he was, leading me to end up doing the same things to people and with people in my life. Nothing but burning bridges, and pushing the most important people in my life away. And just 2 months later, I think, it was then he decided to take me to that Haitian prostitute to change my spirit. Seeing how depressed I had become, and him backhanding me all the time wasn't breaking me out of the gloom I was in. Yeah, way to go. That's the way to raise a kid. Best way to substitute a 12-year-old's mother is by taking him to a fucking whore and to pop his cherry. That'll make him feel better. Fuck him, I hate him. Now Michael was finally, I wish I could kill him now. I'd murder him. Free of his, no, I'm not. Now I hate him murderously. Well, maybe not completely. Murder. After a while of that, feeling that, Michael then took out his rosary and did the thing. I felt at ease again. Oh, thank you, God, I really didn't lose this. And now looking back down at his mitts again, Michael now saw they were their old self. And useful, not possessed anymore, were up to giving solutions to him. Sound solutions. And what they were telling Michael made him smile. Rumpus Pumpus, I ain't dead yet. Michael now looked once again back down at the instruments of his own intervention, felt the drive to continue. And as he turned back onto his stomach, he felt like maybe he could crawl his way out back into his streets. And at least try to get as far as he could before he really bled out and died. If I still die. But I won't at least die like this by giving up. I can do this. But as he started to crawl, he then noticed them. Oh, I'm not alone again. There was another large group of America's finest sieging the building, and as Michael continued to crawl, he saw them running up to him with their weapons drawn. Turn around, slowly, get your hands up, cried out their point man. Michael then slowly turned to his back and lifted his hands over his head in accordance. His entire body felt formless and numb, and he wasn't sure if he was in control of it. Sarge, he's injured. Severely, and he's not armed, called out one. The point man then lowered his weapon, then looked about, seeing all the dead bodies sprawled about, then eyed Mr. Dorian. Fine. Get a stretcher out here and get him out quickly. Prost, Bridges, check the security officers over there, and make sure that motherfucker over there is good and dead, said the point man. Michael watched them run about their business as he then noticed how he was already on a stretcher and being rushed out to a paramedic team waiting to collect all the survivors. Everything just seemed so ethereal, like there was no control, and he felt formless and liked it. He felt like he had dove into that dream of Nikki's, and he felt a sense of peace under the waves of the endless oceans out in Tahiti. Yeah, if I die, that's where I want to die. Fuck this city.